I still remember the morning that changed my perspective on chickadees. It wasn't because one landed on my hand. It wasn't because I found a rare bird in my backyard. It was because a little chickadee refused to come near me, after visiting me every day for months. At first, I assumed it was just one of those things nature does for reasons we'll never understand. But the more I watched, the more I noticed something unsettling. The bird hadn't forgotten me. It had remembered something I hadn't even realized I was teaching it. And once I understood what it was, I started seeing every backyard a little differently. And most people believe birds recognize human faces. Honestly, I think that's only a small part of the story. Because what chickadees seem to remember most isn't who you are. It's the pattern of safety you create without realizing it. And if that's true, there's a good chance the birds visiting your backyard have already formed an opinion about you. And the most surprising thing is how they arrive at that opinion. After that morning, I started paying attention to things I had ignored for years. Not just the birds, but myself. The moment I stepped out of the house and the way I walked across the yard. Whether I filled the feeder before or after making noise, or even how long I sat motionless with my coffee. Little things. Things most of us never give a second thought. But the chickadees seemed to notice every single one of them. At first, nothing made sense. One day they'd show up within minutes. The next, the yard would remain silent. The food hadn't changed. The weather hadn't changed much. But somehow their behavior had changed. That's when I stopped asking, "Why aren't they coming today?" and started asking a much better question. What are they seeing that I'm not? You see, chickadees live in a world where tiny details can mean the difference between eating safely and becoming someone else's meal. Every branch, shadow, unfamiliar sound, and repeating pattern. To us, these moments vanish almost as quickly as they happen. But for a bird weighing less than 15 grams, they turn into information. Not because chickadees sit there thinking the way we humans do, but because over thousands of generations, their survival has depended on recognizing which places remain predictable and which ones suddenly stop being so. That's why I no longer believe birds are simply visiting our yards. I think they are quietly evaluating them. And each visit adds another piece to an invisible picture. A picture built from routines, movements, sounds, moments. And yes, the humans who share that space. The surprising thing is that a single friendly morning usually isn't enough to win their trust, but an unexpected moment can become part of a pattern they won't ignore. And that is where things get much more interesting than most people imagine. Because what a chickadee remembers isn't always what we think we're showing it. If I had to point to one thing that changed the way I think about black-capped chickadees, this would be it. They don't seem to build trust through isolated moments. They build it through patterns. Think about your closest neighbor for a second. You probably don't trust them just because they smiled at you once. You trust them because they have been consistently kind, time and time again. In a very different way, black-capped chickadees seem to learn from that same kind of consistency. Not by making careful decisions like we do, but by constantly comparing today's experience with yesterday's. A quiet backyard stays quiet. There is a pattern and a routine. The same person shows up at more or less the same time. The feeder is filled without any sudden commotion. Nothing unexpected happens. Day after day, these ordinary moments begin to fit together. To us, it's just another routine. To a black-capped chickadee, it can become one more reason to let its guard down and relax in an environment where it feels safe. This is something I didn't fully grasp until I accidentally broke one of my routines. One morning I was running late. Instead of walking slowly toward the feeder as I always did, I hurried across the yard, carrying a ladder on my shoulder. I wasn't thinking about the birds. I was thinking about a loose gutter that needed fixing before the rain. But the black-capped chickadees and other birds noticed, and the singing stopped. Some birds vanished into the trees, while others stayed hidden, watching from a distance. The silence was palpable. Thank goodness it wasn't permanent. They came back, but not right away. That morning reminded me of something simple. We always know why we change our behavior, not the birds. All they see is that something familiar has suddenly become strange. And in nature, the unknown can be enough to make a small bird pause. Not forever, but long enough to decide if the world is still safe. That was when I began to wonder, if black-capped chickadees pay such close attention to consistency, what other things have they been quietly memorizing all along? The more time I spent observing, the more I realized something else. I was never really watching just one bird. Even when only a single black-capped chickadee or another bird landed on the feeder, others were often nearby, hidden among the branches, listening, watching, and waiting. Black-capped chickadees are remarkably social birds. They do not move through the world entirely alone. They pay close attention to one another, especially when it comes to safety. If one bird suddenly issues an alarm call, the others rarely ignore it. And if one bird feels confident enough to approach, another usually follows. I have seen mornings where the first chickadee hesitated for nearly a full minute. It looked around, checked the trees, paused again, and then, almost casually, flew to the feeder. Within seconds, two more appeared, then another. It almost seemed as though the first bird had silently answered a question the others were still asking. Is this place safe today? Of course, we cannot know exactly what was going on in their minds, but we do know that black-capped chickadees constantly observe each other's behavior. In the wild, this is a smart way to survive. Why take the biggest risk yourself when another bird's decision can tell you everything you need to know? This changed the way I viewed my own backyard. I stopped thinking of each visit as a separate event. Instead, I began to see them as chapters in the same story. Each quiet morning added a new page. Each unexpected disturbance wrote one too. And over time, the birds seemed to remember the story more than any single isolated moment. Perhaps that is why trust always seems to take so long to build, yet is surprisingly quick to be destroyed. But I had a habit, a small thing I did without even thinking, that seemed to influence their behavior more than anything else. Sometimes people ask me which seed attracts black-capped chickadees the fastest. Honestly, I don't think that's the most important question. Good food certainly helps. Having fresh water available is always important. Native plants make a difference. But after all these years, I've come to the conclusion that those things tell only part of the story. The habit that seemed to make the biggest difference wasn't something I added to my yard. It was something I stopped doing and stopped rushing. For years, I barely noticed how often I hurried through the yard, carrying tools, dragging hoses, slamming the gate behind me, always focused on the next task. Then, one spring morning, I finished filling the feeder, and instead of walking away, I sat down. I didn't pick up my phone. I didn't prune the bushes. I simply stayed still. At first, nothing happened. The yard seemed almost empty. Then I heard it, a soft, familiar sound coming from somewhere above me. A few moments later, a small bird landed on a nearby branch. Not on the feeder, just on the branch. It looked around. Then it looked at me. I remember smiling without moving a muscle. A second chickadee arrived, and then another. Within a few minutes, the yard seemed alive again. Was it because I sat in silence that morning? I can't say for sure. Nature is rarely that simple. But from that day on, I noticed something. The more predictable my presence became, the less interesting I seemed as a potential threat. And, strange as it may seem, that was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want the birds to notice me. I wanted them to feel comfortable enough to be birds again. Looking back, I think that was the lesson they were trying to teach me all along. Trust isn't built by convincing wild animals that you're friendly. It's built by giving them fewer reasons to wonder if you're dangerous. And once that thought took hold, I began to see something I had completely ignored for decades. Every now and then, someone tells me they are trying to win the trust of the birds in their backyard. I always smile when I hear that, because after all these years, I don't think trust is something we win all at once. I think it's something we build quietly, one ordinary morning at a time. Chickadees don't remember every sound. They don't remember every footstep. They probably don't remember every time you filled the feeder. But over the course of weeks and months, they seem to remember something much bigger, a pattern, a place that remained calm, a routine that rarely startled them, or a backyard where nothing forced them to live in constant fear. Perhaps that is the one thing birds never truly forget about a human being. Not our faces, not our voices, but the feeling they experience whenever we are part of their world. And I have to admit, I find that strangely comforting. In a world that changes so rapidly, these tiny birds remind me that trust still grows the old-fashioned way. Slowly, quietly, one small moment at a time. So tomorrow morning, before you head out, pause for a moment. Look at your backyard the way a chickadee would. Ask yourself, what kind of story has this place been telling? You might be surprised by the answer. I'd love to hear about your own backyard. Have you ever noticed a moment when a chickadee or any backyard bird suddenly seemed to trust you? Or perhaps you've seen them react to something you never imagined. Share your story in the comments. I read them all, and many of my favorite observations have come from people like you. And if quiet moments like these remind you of why you fell in love with backyard birds, I hope you'll join me again. There are still so many little mysteries waiting in the trees. Until next time, take care and keep watching our feathered friends.